Something that you will notice and that we're trying to teach more and more people is that as we set these posts out, you'll see we have these marks on here. This is our grade mark. That grade mark is exactly 69 inches. And this grade mark means that we cannot put that post anywhere past this mark, or we're gonna have to trench in our wire. So when we lay these posts out, we always have a grade mark on it. And then because I'm short, like this I can see over the top of, but you can see that grade mark is buried. So that grade mark is gonna be up here, and obviously I'm a little too short. So we have this sight mark on here that I can line up and sight down the post, which we've discussed in several other videos. And it's critical when you can't see over the top of the post that you have a reference line. And so that's what this is. Gives us a reference line that we can carry our transitions through to get the nice flow and the roll of the fence. With this mark, we can make it roll over a hill, we can make it come down a hill, we can make it flat, we can do whatever we need to. We just need a reference point, and that's what this mark is, a reference point that's about eye height for me. All right, so the reason that the grade mark's down there is because of the wire height. One of the things to remember is that your grade mark goes at 3 inches shorter than your fabric height. So if you have 6-foot fabric, your grade mark will be at 69 inches, which is where we're putting it. Now, there was a little confusion in the very beginning, and they ended up putting it 70 inches, and that's not really a big deal, especially if I was gonna go across the top of concrete. Usually we do 70 inches because I know I can't trench. I wanna give myself that little bit of extra room just to make dang good and sure that my fabric doesn't run into the ground. Now, most people understand the 69-inch mark on the 6-foot tall fence, 3 inches shorter than the fabric height, and they understand the 1-foot mark. What happens is people get really confused when they get to a terminal post and they forget where these marks need to be. Obviously, we need an additional 4 inches at the top of the post for all of our bands and caps and stuff. But then if we have barbed wire, we have to add even more for the barbed wire. So the quickest, easiest way to do that is if you have barbed wire, you want to put 3 lines, one on 4 inches, one on 8 inches, and one on 12 inches, and then one on 16 inches, and the 16 inches is where your rail is going to be. So barbed wire, barbed wire, barbed wire, rail for your top rail, and then this one should be exactly a foot down. That's the easiest way to figure out where these marks need to be, and then from the rail mark to this mark should be your 69 inches. Lay one out, write it all down on a sheet of paper, and then mark them all the same marks. Those are your marks for a 6-foot tall fence. Another helpful fact is, I don't know what we're using some paint sticks, but the best thing to use to mark on any kind of black product or product that you want to be able to erase some marks on is called a mark-all crayon. It's like a lumber crayon. You can mark on them, they're highly visible, but then you can take your finger and wipe them right back off so you don't see them. All right, so we have this line basically set up to start sighting our posts in. The first thing we have to do is we have to set a rabbit post, and that is the post that's going to make sure that we stay straight and that we stay in all of our holes. So we have to have something to sight to. So we've got a rabbit post set up down there. We have all these posts laid out, and they're laid out in a very specific way. When I showed up here just a little bit ago, they were straight out from the hole. I don't like to do that. So since we're pouring mud going this way, I want to be able to grab this post just like this on the way to the hole, stand it up, and be able to stab it in the hole. If it's straight out like this, I have to go from this hole, and then I have to walk all the way over to here, stand it up, and then over there. It's just more steps. Sometimes, especially when you get to 8-foot fence, if my sight mark is 3 feet down and we're doing a 3-foot set, there's only 3 inches difference between my sight mark and my grade mark. So having the bottom at the hole is always very important, knowing which direction we're gonna set, because it's so close I could actually set a post upside down, which would leave me with a post 3 inches too tall. That's why we do things that way. You'll notice a lot of times that we use really large X's because I want to be able to see if that hole moves at all. The other thing is it's really nice if I have some paint on the grass over here, I can see where my initial line was so that I can go back to that line and know that I'm putting this post. But we have really small X's. I can see a little bit of paint right here, which is my white paint. I may not want to be dead in the center of this hole if that wasn't where our original line was. I want to be pretty close to our original line. Now I'm a little too far over. But I've got paint right here and I have paint right here, so I want to set that post up dead center in the middle of that paint. And that should keep me going in the direction I want to be going. So we've got our first post set. Our grade mark is clearly above grade, so we know that we won't have to trench in any fabric. This is a pretty flat grade. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to step back. I didn't set the very end one. The reason I didn't set the very end one, this allows me the ability by myself to go back and sight this one in with my rabbit post down there. If I set this one, then I need a second person to help me with that post because I need them to hold that post straight while I line it up with this one and the very far rabbit post. The way I'm doing it now, I don't need that second person. I can do it all by myself. So I'll do is I'll just hold it up about like that, line it up, make sure that when it's in line, when I'm sighting down this side, that I can just barely see that last one, barely can't see it. And then I'll just let it fall. And because our mud's pretty soft, it's falling really, really well, which sucks. This mud is way, way too wet. So the other thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure all my sight marks are turned out. I will be able to see all of them when I go to line them up for height. Ordinarily, we could very easily set height at the same time we're setting the line, but since this mud is so wet, we'll have to come back and do height on a second pass. So if you come back here, Chris, you'll be able to see. So why don't you tell me which way that post needs to go now, because it definitely needs to move one way or another.
Gotta move a little toward you.
Another thing to think about when you're laying out your posts is which side of the fence you're going to be driving down, especially if you're using a mud bucket. So all these posts are placed on this side of the fence, but ideally, because he wants to travel in that direction and travel forward, it's better to have the posts on the outside of the fence rather than on this side. So be thinking about how your flow of operations to make sure that you don't have to move things 3 times. So I always have to have 3 posts. I have to have the posts I'm working on and then 2 other ones to be able to line everything up. So now I've got 2 posts this way so I can start.
You don't have to focus on your rabbit post.
I don't have to yet. That rabbit post is just there to make sure that I don't move. So all I'm doing is holding this post and then looking at my level when I get it lined up and then just kind of letting it fall in the hole. This mud is so wet, it's not taking any effort whatsoever to get these posts down. And then make sure all your marks are turned out and on the same side. We're just trying to run your mark down to about grade, within an inch of grade, let's say. And then we'll come back and do the height later. What we'll do, just to double check ourselves, is we can go back to that one and then line this and our rabbit post up again and make sure that we're in the right spot. So somebody want to check us and make sure we're still going good? The most critical time to check your line is in the first few posts. Okay? And then we don't dwell on it. We just freaking set it and we move on. We don't have all day. So we're gonna do the best we can and then we'll fix it later on. Don't get hung up on absolutely dead perfect. It's not realistic. You know, what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to get these things as straight as possible. If your bubble's off like a fraction, if it's not exactly dead center in that thing, that's not really what we're looking for. Really what matters is what your eye sees. Is your eye see this thing is straight? Because you could have it dead plumb, and if your post is out, the eye is gonna be like the fence wiggles. That's not what you want. You know, if you wanted it perfect, we'd be using 6-foot levels. So when you're doing this and you're trying to sight things in, one of the most important things to do, more on the stabbing side of things, if you're gonna stab into the concrete, we have concrete all the way around this post, underneath it, inside of it, everything. So as we do this, we wanna make sure that grade mark is all the way down to grade. Getting posts down becomes very difficult. Pulling them back up can be difficult, but is a lot easier than trying to knock them down once the concrete starts secure inside the hole. So make sure they're low enough. So that's all we're doing, is we're just trying to get that grade mark to grade. If I know I've got a big dip, I might not push it down that far. Or if I've got a big hill, I'll push it down just a little bit extra or something. But we'll always want to make sure that grade mark's pretty close to where we want to be. So that when we come back here in just a second and adjust all our heights, we don't have any issues with concrete being too firm for us to be able to get it down. There we go, we win. Okay, so what do you think I'm gonna see here? Is this gonna line up at all? If I line up this face with the face of that post, they're not gonna line up because we basically have a line of sight that's going like this because this post is bigger than that one. So they're gonna intersect. So I just wanna make sure that I see the same thing on this side that I see on that side. That'll tell me I'm lined up with the center of the fence. So you see how when we line up, I see an air gap? I'm gonna hold it plumb for you so you can try and see it. You see that air gap? Now look on the other side, and you should see the same thing, hopefully. So what we're doing here, because we have these giant posts, the first thing we did was set our intermediate line posts for our support, just because these roller posts are set so far apart. The second thing I'm gonna do, the very last thing, is we're gonna set these big posts and we're gonna work away from our line. So we started with that one and then we did this one. But if I line up this face with the face of this post right here, what you're gonna see is that they line up rifle sighting to about the center of the post. Now if I go to the other side of this post and line up this face with that face, you're still gonna see that we line up about with the center of the post, and that's what indicates that we have a good straight line and that our line is centered perfectly on the fence line, which is what we want. So whatever we see on this side when we line up these two faces is the same thing I should see on this side when I line up two faces. And currently that is the center of the post right here on both of them. And so we're 69 inches, that's a bare minimum we need, or we're gonna be trenching. So if it's a little inch up, it means our fabric's gonna be about an inch above the ground. So I kinda wanna be able to see this all the time. Either right at grade or just slightly above grade would be ideal. And then we just start playing with it and seeing what we need to do. So if I raise this one, right now if I look at that across the top of my level, it means I need to raise it about that high. Well, I mean, I'm not that tall, and so this post is quite a bit too deep. There's a mark. So if I line all these marks up and I look down them right now, that's it right there. That's almost perfect, isn't it? So now we can go back to this one, and why don't you lift that mark up and try and get it all lined up with the other ones. Just get that to where you think it lines up perfectly, and then I'll check it. Sometimes it's best to go a little past where you need to go and then settle it back down in there, because the suction will suck it right back down in there. You know, if you need to move it 1.5 inches, don't be afraid to pull it up 4 inches. And then you just kind of spin it right back down. That's it, you think?
I think it needs to come down here more.
Oh yeah, definitely down. This mark does not line up with the other 2 marks. It might line up with the first mark, but you can't get all 3 of them to line up. Pretty close, but just my experience tells me you're still just a smidge high, like right there. I mean, it's a very fine line. So even that smidge, when you transfer that out 500 feet, it's gonna be way off.
Big growth, yeah.
Then we just wanna make sure all our tops line up. If we didn't really bump the post, then it should still be good. But we're flat here. We can put a level down here right across grade. We know we're about 1 inch high, we're good. I'll give us 1 inch clearance. Ordinarily what we would do is right where our sight mark is on the very far terminal post that we're shooting for, our rabbit post, basically on both ends we'd have flagging, and we'd wrap it so the top of the flagging is at the line and everything is below, and that also gives us a nice reference point to see very far away whether or not we need to come up or down if we have a flat line. It just gives us a really good hard visual reference. Not to mention, as I look back at this line, I can see the 6 5/8 posts on both sides of this, but if I had that flagging, I'd really be able to see just how much 6 5/8 post is sticking out on each side to make sure that we're dead center. So after we've set the posts and stabbed them in the concrete, we ought to wait a little bit. And as wet as this mud was, it's really important that we wait enough so that it has the grabbing power, because all these posts just wanted to go straight to the bottom as soon as we put them in. So we've got to wait just long enough, kind of that perfect right time. It's not too set up that we break the bond between the pipe and the concrete and we can't reestablish it. But yeah, it's firm enough that we can actually support the post. So we've done that, we've waited, it's the perfect consistency right now, or perfect moisture content. And now is when we line all these marks up. Because this line here next to me and the one right behind me is perfectly flat for the most part, we're just lining all these lines up. The other thing we can do is, if you don't want to do that, you can actually set a string line up down here, but of course we're trying to stay away from string lines. We also have this nice curb down here, so what they're doing a lot of is just leveling off the curb and then setting it to that, and you can see that that's giving us a pretty nice line. If you looked at all these marks would line up perfectly all the way down the fence line if we just started gun sighting all these in. This line would line up with this line right here, and that one would line up with this one. So if I look down at all of them, should be right in line. There's some things that I can do, especially when we deal with bigger posts, because all these faces, as we've talked, do not line up. Sometimes what I need to do is I can put a level on here to give me a little bit of a bump out to where I can still transfer that line out here and see past, which was really important when we set these 6 5/8 posts right over here, to be able to move my line to where I needed it. So use your level, hold your level out sideways from a post like this and level so that you can sight across the top of this if you need to. But then when you get it all said and done, the most important part is to step back, come off to the side and step back a ways like we are right now, to where you can see if there's any problems. I can look across that and see that all those line posts line up. Now the 6 5/8 posts are not set to height. The posts are in the ground 4 feet already. No big deal, we'll come back and we'll trim those off, but we've got all our lines transferred to those so we know exactly where to cut those off so that it lines up with the rest of the fence. But if I step back off to the side, and Sean King uses a rule, he says step off to the side 5 feet and back 10 feet, I think. And you can see whether or not you have a problem. If it doesn't look good now, it won't look good when you put the top rail on it. Same thing here, I can look at this line here, that looks really good. If there was a spot in it I didn't like, I would go correct that. The goal is to try and balance keeping the fabric really tight to the ground while also keeping a nice flow to the top rail. So. Now I know a lot of guys will actually put all their tension bands on the post with the bolts in place. I don't like to do that because we want to space them out perfectly and we don't know exactly where our wire is going to be. And it just takes a lot of work to try and feed that tension bar down through your fabric, get it through the bolts and do everything perfectly. So we don't do that. We put the tension bands on as we connect to our wire connection. One of the biggest places that we see people screw up is on putting rail ends on. And there's a couple ways that they screw up. Number one, they'll screw up and not orient them correctly so that they have if we had these oriented incorrectly, we'd have a jump in our top rail. One top rail would be down here and then you turn the corner, it'd be up here. So we have a mismatch. And these are offset rail ends, and the reason they're offset is so that when you do come around a corner, you can turn one upside down and still have it be even so that all your top rail lines up evenly. Another place we see people screw up is not orienting their nuts and bolts correctly. All your nuts should be on the inside of the property or the secure side of the property. So since the wire is going on this side of the fence, the nuts should face in. The last place that we find people screwing up with rail ends, as we talked about the other day, we have all of our marks right here. The first mark is 4 inches down, then this is 4 inches, this is another 4 inches, and this is 16 inches. The 16-inch mark right here that we put on our post, when we set it, corresponds to the top of this post. So because our top rail is clearly over the top of this post, all this top rail needs to be above that line. What people will do is not put that line on there, try and eyeball it and get it close, or they'll orient their rail ends incorrectly, and then all of a sudden we have a dip at the corner or a raise at the corner. The way we teach our people to do this so that they remember it is that it's top rail and the bottom of the top rail needs to go above the line. However they put these on here, the bottom of the top rail should line up with that line. If this is going to have a brace and we're going to do a mid brace and truss, we teach the same thing. If we have a line here, because it's the middle rail, the middle of that rail needs to be on that line. The middle of that rail needs to be on that line. So if I draw a line 36 inches down here and there's a line right here, just put the middle of the rail right on that line, and then that way it's even all the way across every time. So that's our rule. Top rail goes above the line, middle rail goes centered on the line. And if you do that, they'll do it correctly every time, and you won't have a rail that's sloped and looks wrong because somebody couldn't understand what was going on. You'll see here behind me, or down this road, that they have all of the chain link laid out, and we'll talk about the way we do that. So because we're using a fence hog, which is another great piece of equipment from Easy Grout, we are laying out our chain link oriented this way, parallel with the fence, rather than perpendicular to the fence, because we're going to hand roll it out. The machine will pick this up and dispense it right along the fence standing up. And in order to do that, we need to know which way we're going to put our fabric. So this wire is what we call a knuckle twist. It has a knuckle at the top, and down here at the bottom, we have the twist. Our company policy is to always put the twist at the bottom whenever there's barbed wire on the top. We feel like the barbed wire is providing adequate crawl over protection, and so that twist being at the bottom provides adequate crawl under prevention. Now, if we were doing a security fence without barbed wire and it was knuckle twist wire, we would put the twist up to encourage people not to climb over the fence, because that's the most obvious weakness of the fence. If this is a school or a facility where we want to make sure not harm people, then we would want to put the knuckle on both ends of the wire and not order wire with a twist at all. Lastly, you'll see that they ran the tension wire here. The tension wire is ran at the bottom of the fence. They actually asked me why we put the tension wire at a certain height. So in our fences, we always tell our guys that the tension wire needs to go a half a diamond up from the bottom. You could either go a half a diamond or a diamond, but we want it pretty close to the bottom. And if we want our tension wire to be a half a diamond up, then we need to make sure that we're about 1 inch to 1.5 inches above wherever the bottom of the fabric is. And lucky for you, we marked that the other day when we put these in the ground. Because you remember, we did a mark at the bottom of the post, 3 inches shorter than the fabric height, which on a 6-foot fence equals 69 inches. So we've got our 69-inch mark on all these posts. We just need to be 1.5 inches above that, and you can see on all the tension wire they've done, they've made sure that their tension wire is 1 inch to 1.5 inches above that grade mark. When we do our hookups, one of the things we do is we like to use our top rail dresser, and this is the way that is, because what we want to do is we want to have that diamond, the middle of that top diamond. So we just pull it up there, then we'll get everything just right. Then we tighten these down. Now we don't get carried away to over tightening. A lot of people want to tighten those all the way down, and that's not what we do. We just want them tight enough to where they grab. And a lot of times the only one I'll tighten down all the way is maybe the very top one, and that just holds my tension bar and keeps it from falling all the way down. That's really all there is to hooking up. As mentioned before, we don't put any of our bands on first, because I put them on right now just because we want to have these bands exactly where we want. So what I like to do is I like to go anywhere from 4 to 4.5 diamonds on 6 foot. And that keeps us evenly spaced all the way down. And that keeps all our brace bands spaced evenly and meets your specifications. Usually if you have a specification, it'll specify that you have to have them a certain distance apart max. So. So I'm going to show you guys a different way instead of using the banana clips, because we could have a lot of scraping and scratching. Rather than using banana clips, we'll use these. Again, anytime you're pulling wire, you want to make sure that you're putting the tie past any obstructions in the direction of the pull. So we wouldn't want to put a tie here, and we wouldn't want to put a tie on that side of the post since we pulled that way. So what we can do is we can take this up here, we can put this on, because it's not the right size tie. This is a 2 3/8. It has lots of slack. So I'll just put that in there like that. And then as it starts twisting, I'll pull down. So I'm only getting like a half a twist. That's enough to keep it on there and keep it from falling over. But it's not so much that it's gonna tighten that all the way down and start messing things up, and it'll hold our wire. Then we can slide no problem. Maybe behind every 3rd or 4th post, just throw one of them on. And that's how you do it. We want this diamond in the center of the top rail. I don't know if that's the way you do it, but that's the way we dress everything out. That's why our measurement's 69, that's why everything works out. So if you're gonna do everything that we do as far as measurements, then you need to have the top diamond right in the center of the top rail. So we'll just put one on here, and we'll have one person go through and stuff everything. Now, if this wire was low or high, we'd have our top rail dresser on there if you want to show them. Anybody that hasn't seen this before, that's what it does, is just pick up the wire and you put it right next to the post. The first thing we'll do is we'll tie all of our posts. That just gets the wire up to a fairly uniform height. And if you pull on this too hard, you'll bend the knuckles back. So you want to just, this is already high enough. You don't want to pull too hard or you'll go too high. Once you get your wire to the right height, you start stuffing ties. This is the only place I don't count, and the reason I don't count is because it's just too hard when you have vertical diamonds and trying to get them on the right spot. The big thing is to make sure you're always putting your tie on the wire. This wire is touching the post. If it's not touching the post, don't put it on it. I just put one at the top, the middle, and the bottom. And the bottom's kind of an important tie when you put it on, because with the bottom tie, you can either hold the wire up or you can hold it down if it's trying to pull up. And as we tie the ties, we want to make sure that this tension wire is exactly where we want it, because if we tie all these ties and our tension wire is up underneath all of our twists and stuff and our knuckles, it's a nightmare to do. So as we tie this, we'll want to make sure that we try and keep that tension wire exactly where we want. And that tension wire is designed right now to be half a diamond up, right here, half a diamond up from the bottom. So if I put that tie on there, that tension wire cannot fall down and get all tangled up in the bottom of my fence anymore. And that's what I want to do. The whole time I'm putting those bottom ties on is keep that tension wire where I need it. So when I come back to hog ring, it's just boom, 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 boom. We're not fighting anything. Since I have one at the top, the middle, and the bottom, I'm just going to find the center, and I'm going to center that one up, and I'm going to center this one up, probably right about there. Then we tie those. Now when we tie these, never ever tie them straight out. You can put your drill on, but then when you tie it, whichever side's comfortable for you, right or left, depending on right or left-handed, you'll twist these around and have them straight out the side of the post. So you just kind of pinch them together with your fingers and you get them in there, and you'll get really good at this over time. And you'll have to put it on probably gear 1, the first, most aggressive one. Ready? Yep, perfect. That's it. So the next person can come down here and we can put a top rail dresser on if you've got it. Yep, right next to the post. It'll lift the wire up right there. Yep, you're dead on. Top, middle, and the bottom. You can see how right now my tension wire is right there. But if my tension wire is falling like that, I can actually put it on that right there. So I could put my tie right here, but then my tension wire wants to fall down. Instead of doing that, I'm gonna pull it up, put it where I want it, and then I'll put it on this wire right here. And then that tension wire can't fall down anymore. Which is the other reason when I do this, I want to make sure my wire is kicked out past my tension wire the whole way down. I don't want what we don't want as we do this is for this stuff to happen to where it's pulled up in the wire like that. All the way down, we want to keep our tension wire on the inside of that. So that's why we keep the bottom always kicked out just a little bit still. Now we can get another top rail dresser. We're ready to go over here. Top, middle, bottom. And I got to pull that up. Put that tie on, that'll hold that up. Now, it's important to know too that if they don't have the wire pulled up to the top rail just yet, I can put all these ties on. I just need to make sure that I give them room to pull this wire up. So I wouldn't want to put this here because then it'll run into the cap. So I'll put this one right here and start there. And then I don't have to wait for them to pull that wire up. I can just keep going. One of the things to think about that we were just talking about is if you're right-handed, if you put this tool on the other side so that you're not spinning into the tool, that cord can get in the way. So just have your top rail dresser on the opposite side of the post to where you're spinning your ties to. Now that we've got the post all tied, the next step is that we can go ahead and tie all the top rail. But before we tie the top rail, what we want to do is dress the fence out, because these don't always line up perfectly and you'll have ups and downs. Like you can see the top of it kind of looks like a dinosaur's back. Not too bad. This wire dresses out real easy. But your galvanized wire is going to be a lot tougher and you're going to have a lot more of those ups and downs. What we do is we'll just go down, we'll kind of lift it up and dress it all out. And then as soon as it's all dressed out, then we'll do our top rail ties. So right now, we just need one person to say, okay, raise or lower it, and one or two guys go through and they pick it up, they pull it down, they get all the tops perfectly straight. Like I can see a big sag right here in this one. Then you can look back this direction, and when you look back all the way down these diamonds, you can see it in the sun. You can see exactly where your problems are. Like it's a little lower there, it's a little low right here. So you just gotta have one person that kind of directs the other person to dress it out. It's good. We got a little bit of a belly right here. We got a little belly right here. And you can feel it when you pull up on it. You can feel it kind of crack and get all locked into place and get where it needs to be. You're a little higher right in front of you, Chris. Come this way a little bit. Right there. There you go. So that's good. Yep. Still got a little bit of a high spot right here. Maybe a little high right here. So you guys were talking about how tight to get the wire. If you get your wire too tight, dressing it out is going to be a nightmare. This wire, especially since this is an 11 gauge core wire, you'll actually shrink your wire. It'll be 6 foot down there and you pulled on it so hard to try and get it tight down here that now it's only 5'8" down here and you're wondering why you're so high off the ground. So overstretching wire is not a good thing. This wire is not high tensile wire. It can stretch and it'll elongate and do all kinds of weird things. I'll go as far as I possibly can. I'll go 5,000 feet if that's what I can do. I'll stretch it before 5,000 feet. We'll usually typically only go about 200 feet before we stretch, depending on what kind of machine we're using. And with this little machine here, maybe we only want to go every 100, 150 feet because it just doesn't have the power to pull it. So let's say we had another 500 feet going that way. What we'll do is we'll come past this post, we'll pull it, and we'll tie this entire section of top rail and this entire post and maybe another post back behind it, and that kind of locks everything in place. And when you let off on it, even though there's tension there, it doesn't go anywhere. The post doesn't move because it's tied to the top rail, and you just made basically a brace right there. And then we'll go up ahead and we'll stretch again until it's nice and tight to this post, and we'll just kind of leapfrog our stretches so we don't have to have a brace. The braces really don't add any value to what we're doing, because if they're like, well, maybe it makes it easier to repair. Not really, because I can repair right in the middle of the fence. That's some engineer that thought he was a fence builder that put that stuff in there, and we're still fighting it, where they say you got to have a brace every 500 feet, which is pretty common. Once we've got this all done now though, we can see and we look down this thing and it's pretty good. Like there's a little bit of a high spot right here maybe, but we've got it. Like you can see right down all these knuckles. It's looking good. Once that's done, somebody comes through here and we start stuffing, and when we stuff top rail ties, it's just like this. The common spec for top rail, on posts you're usually supposed to have a tie every 14 or 15 inches. On top rail it's usually every 2 feet. Rather than have people guess at 2 feet, we know that we've got to have 5 ties between 2 posts if they're 10 foot apart, right? So what we'll usually do is we'll just count diamonds. So I'd count, we just go 2, 4, 6, 8, tie. 2, 4, 6, 8, tie. And that's all I do. I don't care where these ties are to this post, because that's not what the spec says. The spec says a tie every 24 inches on your top rail. And when you do this and you get some guy that comes in here, I could tie this thing in about 5 minutes, all this whole thing, if somebody stuffs all the ties for me. Just boom, boom, boom. And your arm will get a little sore.
Do these stick straight out as well, or do we do what we did here and kick them back into the fabric?
We don't knock these back to the fabric on industrial projects. Only on projects where we're worried about, people interacting with the fence, a school or something like that, we'll kick these all the way back. They can't get hurt by that tie that way and on this side of the fence, and they can't get hurt by it on that side of the fence. People get all worried about these ties and forget we got bolts sticking out all over the place. On industrial fences, we leave them just like this. That's the intent. Just like that. I mean, we've got barbs up here that people can run into, so. An industrial fence is designed in some respects to pose a problem.
Correct.
So that's it. That's how we tie fence. And the hog ringing is basically just, we have a hog ring and somebody comes along here and you hog ring as fast or maybe faster than putting the ties on. Just straight down, just kind of look up and go straight down from your ties if you already counted your ties.
Okay. So on our barbed wire, we're gonna stretch from the inside. So we're gonna start at the top
at the top strand, and then we'll work our way down. Now, if we were gonna start on the outside, say there was obstructions on the inside and we wanted to stretch from the outside, we'd start from the bottom wire and we just flip it over the fence. So we can use our chain strainer. This is the Strainrite FX2. So on this end, we can wrap this end around our post and we can just run the chain through the grab. So here's our brace band to tie it off. I like to have a little bit of a gap between here, between my stretcher and the band, so that I have room to twist that barbed wire around itself. So first I'll just wrap that around there, and then I'll grab the other end and I'll come back here, and it's just like kind of like a pork chop. Some people call it a pork chop, a wire dog, I don't know, all sorts of different names. But hook that in there, and then you've got your hook end here. So here we can pull it. Oh, almost got it. It's my finger getting in the way. I got it. Okay, there we go. Well, I didn't do a super awesome job. You want your chain not to be twisted, and I actually do have it twisted. So I'm gonna pop this back loose again. I'm gonna run my chain straight. And actually, now that the barbed wire is not hooked on the fence, it's pulling easier. But I want this chain, the links on this chain, to be pretty straight. I'm turned a quarter turn. You just want to make sure that as you're doing this, these hooks hook into the chain. Don't let off on this handle before this is hooked, because if you let off of this handle, it's going to come back and make you toothless and ruthless. There, we're really tight. So from here, we'll just pull our slack end of the barbed wire. And what I do is I just look at where the bolt is in the brace band and I mark it with my finger. I do a little 90-degree turn right there. So I know that I need about that much room to be able to loop it around and tie it back to itself. So I'll cut this wire right here, and then I'll strip this barb off the wire right here. So we've got the tail of our wire cleaned off from that barb. So now we can just slide it right up through the brace band behind the nut and bolt. I went a little close with my stretcher, but by putting that little 90-degree turn on this wire, when I pull up, it'll pop right in, and that way it'll have most of that slack out of the barbed wire, so you don't end up putting slack back into the wire once you let off of the stretcher. So if you can get one good wrap around like so, then you can let off on your stretcher. From there we can drop that down out of our way, and we can get the rest of our wraps around. I like 4 wraps around myself. And you want nice pretty tight wraps like that. Maybe a little prettier. There you go. So now we're ready for our next strand. And all we ever do pulling the barbed wire is we usually park our barbed wire spooler at this end, and then we'll just run it out. And if you got a crew of 3 doing barbed wire, usually there's one guy pulling the wire out, there's one guy on the other end tying it off, and then me on this end just stretching it and tying off. And we just keep that process going all the way around. I'll make sure when I cut it long. I don't want to cut it too short, that's no fun. So cut a little long. You know, if you got 2 feet extra, that doesn't hurt anything. But if you've got 2 inches too short, you can't tie it off. And now you've got to put a splice in the wire, and you don't really want to do that. Pretty well tied off. So we can grab this end. So I just pull some slack off the roll, give it a tug. Right here where my hand is, I can easily, that's plenty. I'll just go ahead and, like I said, I don't want to be short. So I'll go ahead and cut that, yeah, and hold on to the loose end so it doesn't get you in the face or the eye. So we can use our chain, gauge our length. I am king of pulling it too hard to break it. Like, oh, I can get it one more click, snap. Right in your stretcher is where it'll snap most of the time. So marking my bend, and here we have, it's right at the barb. I just kind of hook the other end to get it to guide up into there. So usually when you're stretching barbed wire, you're going to use the same tool to stretch your barbed wire that you do to stretch your tension wire. So on your long runs, you can use the chain strainer like this, and on the short runs, like right here, you'll use that T-handle. I'm just gauging my length here. So I want to clip my stretcher in about right there. Looks good. So on your my top wire, the barb's right in the way. I can just kick the barb arm off to the side. Get that snapped in and then yep, and then I can kick it back. There it goes. Locked it in. The guys are gonna keep running that barbed wire all the way down, round. Other guys are hanging gates, and then that's gonna complete this job. So this week's gone pretty good. We've been training about, 10 guys we've had around here floating around, training, learning chain link. Pretty good productive week. Until next time, you have a good dang day.